Welcome to Conversations from the Edge of Consciousness. I'm your host, Kristine Madera. For me, and possibly for you, the inner world of consciousness has always been much more real and way more fun than the so-called real material world. Growing up, I thought I was alone in this, but I'm not. There are a lot of us, and far too many have no one to talk to who shares this experience. I've been lucky to cultivate a community of friends who love to talk about the energies, ideas, and vibrations that are pushing the edges of our own consciousness, as well as our collective consciousness. In Conversations from the Edge, we share our conversations with you. Welcome to Conversations from the Edge. This is your host, Kristine Madera, and we're back today with Jana Roemer. And Jana is an astrologer and a yoga nidra practitioner and a yogi. So she has brought all of these together to create astro nidras, which is a lying down meditation where the body relaxes to a sleep state while awareness remains online. And it's a practice that helps to awaken the multitude of transitions that life has to offer, and it provides a cure for a busy mind. Welcome back, Jana. It's really nice to have you here.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's so nice to be back. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm excited about talking about Libra, which is another one of those signs that I really don't know that much about. Start us off. What do we want to know first about Libra?
There's a couple significant parts about Libra season. One is that it is the beginning of autumn. So the first day of Libra season is the autumn equinox, if we're in the northern hemisphere. And of course, it would be the spring equinox in the southern hemisphere. But from the position of planet Earth in comparison with the sun, we have equal day to night. And oftentimes when we get to these equilibrium points, and I think I talked about this in spring equinox, what we see is all the ways that we're actually out of balance. And because if we're meant to come into balance, it has to be illuminated where we're out of balance. And one of the themes of Libra season is the scale and balancing the scales. And so that is quite significant. And I'll get more into the scales in a second. But the other aspect of Libra season is that during the first 6 seasons from Aries, which is the astrological new year, to Virgo, it's all about me. You know, Aries is who am I? Taurus is what's my worth? Gemini is what's my message? Cancer is how do I need to be loved? Leo is how do I love and express my creativity? Virgo is how do I become my best self and how do I serve? And then when we come to Libra, it's who am I in relationship to another? And so we're introducing the other. And in some of the earlier episodes that we did, I talked about how when you look across the zodiac, that helps you to understand the sign that you're looking at in a more holistic perspective. And I find it really interesting that across the zodiac from Libra is Aries. And Aries is all about me, 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 my. Sorry, Aries, I love you. But as an archetype, that's really what it is. It's all about me. Anybody who's been in a substantial relationship knows that the healthier you show up as you, the more centered you are in yourself and are established in your values and in your integrity and in who you are, you show up that much healthier in the relationship. So instead of sliding into codependency, which we might see when, let's say, there's a square between Cancer and Libra, we could easily slide into codependency. When you're more rooted in your Aries self, which is knowing who you are, the better off you are in your relationships. And this includes all relationships that involve a contract. So it could be a marriage. It could be a business partnership or a co-creator. If you think of any relationship that involves a contract, it would fall under the domain of Libra. It also, less spoken of in astrology, but definitely a part of Libra, is where we find our frenemies. Do you remember that frenemies from Sex and the City?
Yeah.
So I don't know if anybody has this in their life where, let's say they have children and they have these relationships through their children. Maybe it's through the school or maybe it's through extracurricular activities. But the parents of others, they really drive you bonkers. but you have to be in relationship with them because your kids are best friends or whatever it is. And they become maybe a frenemy. So they're close in your life, or maybe it's somebody in your office space or in your friend circle where it's just a very challenging relationship, but it's, you got to figure it out. So that also lives in Libra season, which is interesting because it brings me back to the scales of justice. And so when we're looking at Libra, the symbol is the scale. And when you think of Libra itself, it is the center pole of the scale. And then the things that you're weighing sit on the little dishes. And so the Libra archetype itself is the one who sits in the center of that, is essentially able to mediate between two sides. And so some of the things that people hear in pop culture about Libra is like, oh, they just waffle. They're really different. They take their time to make up their mind. They never have an opinion on anything. They, there's a lot of like insults to every sign. But this one, when I always like to look at, well, where does that come from? And it's because they're often weighing both sides of the scale. And it's like, until they have enough information that they feel confident that the decision that they're going to make is fair and just, they'll keep weighing the scales until they find that balance point.
It sounds like a quality that we really need somewhere in human society and the zodiac anyway, because so often in other signs and just people in general are so easy to weigh in on one side of the scale or the other, to have that kind of pre-built in that deliberative sort of personality type seems like it would be actually quite helpful.
It's so helpful. And not only is it helpful, it's absolutely necessary. We often find judges, lawyers and judges, and, maybe politicians don't get framed in the best light, but oftentimes Libra is where we'll put the politicians in astrology. There's a couple places that politicians land. And when I'm going to say politician, I want to erase any sour feelings towards politicians and go to where they're meant to be, right? They're meant to stand for the community and be able to see the best in everybody and get everybody in their best positions. And so Libra as leaders, if we look at across the zodiac, the Aries is this really prolific leader in the world. Libra as a leader is one who is able to sit amongst their community and see the best in everybody and reflect that back to them through the mirror of relationship, and bring the best out of people and help them to really step into their zone of genius. And so
beautiful.
It's actually, Libras they tend to get along with the most signs. They're the easiest to get along with often.
Well, I would think, and now this might just be projecting on there when you talk about like politicians and judges and things with Libra, that one of the qualities of a really good politician is to be able to weigh the benefits of, say, a policy for all constituents and come up with that thing that is fair and just and, not my way or the highway, like so often things come back down to. But that's a real skill set. And I do think it's a good politician. That is something that they are deeply skilled at.
I wish we had more of those politicians in the world.
Amen. Amen.
But let's not go political because everybody's so over it, I think, right now. It's too much.
It is too much, yes.
It is. But so another quality of Libra is to be a mediator. And that mediator, like Libras often make pretty good parents, especially to multiple children, because they're able to mediate, like, okay, so I see you need this and you need this. Now, what can we do to get both of you to get what you need out of this situation? And in friendship circles, they tend to be peacekeepers, right? Where they're able to kind of bridge some conflict. And then the other thing is, if we look at it, it's an air sign. It's a cardinal air sign. And the previous air sign that we spoke of was Gemini. And I don't know if you remember, maybe you're a new listener, so I'll do a quick little review. One of the skills of Gemini, if we're looking at air signs, one of the skills of Gemini is to be able to hold two opposites simultaneously and to hold them both in curiosity in Gemini. In Libra, it's to be able to hold the opposites and bring them into balance with each other. And you'll see when we get to Aquarius season, the air there is to be able to allow all opposites or divergent expressions to come together to create wholeness. And so we can't get there if we're not able to hold two opposites together and say, okay, you both get a fair seat at the table.
And then that key skill set in Gemini of actually approaching it from curiosity versus, I know what's best.
Exactly.
And that can really open up dialogue and possibilities. So it's interesting how that's a progression through the zodiac.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that to be very interesting. And then when we're looking at the body, we've been talking about the body all along. So Libra lives in a couple different places. It lives most commonly spoken of in the kidneys. And what's the function of the kidneys? It's to sort and clean, right? It's like cleaning the blood. It's sorting out the excess for your urine. And also the kidneys are a place where we make some of our different hormones and chemicals of the body. And there's two kidneys. They sit on either side of the body. I mean, you don't absolutely have to have two kidneys to survive, but the design of a human is to have two and to be in balance there. And then it like cleanses and comes together for release. The other place that Libra will live in the body is the lower back. And the lower back, I think if we look at the spine, the lumbar spine is the weight bearing, it's the weight load, right? So the top of the sacrum to where the first rib comes out, that's the lumbar spine. And the sacrum is the backbone of the pelvis, that triangular bone at the back of your pelvis. And so if these are all weight bearing, you think like Libra is trying to be the peacekeeper all the time, or trying to, work for social justice, or be the mediator, or trying to weigh out these decisions. That's a heavy weight to carry in this life.
It is.
And so, and so we look at, people that have compression fractures or different back injuries. The low back is one of those places where it's like, oh, I'm just carrying too much, or I lifted something wrong that's causing me an issue. Or on the flip side, if we have a strong core and we have the ability to pull into our center and know who we are, remember that's the Aries across the zodiac, then the back tends to stay in much better repair. So just some interesting things to think about when we're working in the body.
Yeah, fascinating.
When we're going from Virgo season to Libra season, we're going from summer to autumn. And summer is more of a yang energy, or yang, I'm saying that incorrectly, pardon me, more of a yang energy, a more extroverted, a more playful, a more like, let's get out and be with friends. When we shift into autumn, we're moving into a yin energy. It's more internal. It's more like you're drawing your resources inward. I always like to think of the seasons from like a homesteading perspective. And you're basically bringing all your crop into your house, into your home, and you're processing your food now to prepare for the autumn and the winter. And that processing of the food from your garden, this is a metaphor, like all of the hard work that you maybe did or didn't do over the summer. Maybe it's about harvesting your joy, or harvesting your hope, or harvesting that play of the summer, and bringing the warmth of the sunshine into now when we're moving in towards darker days, towards the winter solstice. And so we are pulling out your sweaters and your slippers and your cozy blankets, and making sure you've got your pantry well stocked, and your jams and jellies and preserves made, right? To make sure that, as we go into these shorter, more cozy, more internal, introverted days, you have everything you need right there in your home. And this Libra season in particular, we're actually starting with 5 planets and Chiron in retrograde. And so the planets that are in retrograde, it's all the karmic and generational planets. We have Jupiter, which is the master teacher and what is being expanded. We have Saturn, which is the Lord of Karma, whose tool is time, that pulls you into integrity. We have Uranus, which is innovation and awakening. We have Neptune, which is either that complete delusion of the mind, or the psychic nature of the mind, the subconscious mind taking you into dream space, or that state of yoga nidra where you can go deeper into your own psyche. And Pluto, which is death, transformation, and rebirth, and really that shows us where our power lies. It's kind of like an alchemical planet or a shamanic planet that enforces massive transformation. And Chiron, which is our wounds, this wound that everybody has it. You have that one thing that you think, oh, finally, I feel confident in this area. I've been struggling my whole life. And then before you know it, you're just getting sideswiped by it again. The same thing. We all have it, right?
Yeah. That's a lot of retrograde.
Yes. So we're looking at going inward instead of outward. And I think if we look globally at what's going on at this stage of the pandemic, there's so much division. And I'm not going to get into sides or beliefs or, what people think. I think that's dangerous territory to tread on publicly. Yeah. But no matter where you sit, I think this external expression has become more divisive. There's more hate. There's more fighting, all of it. And I think that many of us are feeling this pull to disengage from that dialogue. Personally, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear any side of the story. I don't want to hear any of it. I just want you all to go home and really think about what your heart wants. Right. And that's what all these retrograde planets are saying. They're saying, unplug from the external world, go in your heart. Don't let your fear speak louder than your love right now. And that's what's
well put.
Yeah. And that's what's being weighed in the scale, because we're so out of balance. I don't think, I'm 42. I don't think I've ever seen this kind of imbalance in humanity in my life. And we're being asked okay, where is the balance point? And is there a way to disentangle your own psyche from the collective psyche so that you can come back to your heart, right?
Yeah.
So it's a really intense autumn.
And it seems to come as a perfect season for Libra, because once you come in to that heart space and you don't have the distraction of what everybody's telling you should think or feel or do or whatever, all that external world stimuli, then you can be your center point and you can begin to get curious about all the sides that are trying to control the narrative. And come into what your heart is telling you about that, and begin to weigh those things within. So it does sound like a perfect season for all this, which all of this always seems to work together, being the perfect season. Whether or not people actually take advantage of that, that's one thing. But the energies of all of this seem to help support this process in everybody, but particularly for people who are kind of mindfully moving through this in an intentional way and taking the most advantage of the energies available.
Yeah. This, though, is where I think it gets interesting in Libra season, is that we start with Venus, which is our relationships and our harmony point, in Scorpio. We also start with Mercury and Mars in Libra. And if you look at both Mercury and Mars, one of the key features of Libra season is that Mercury is going to station retrograde on the 26th of September and stay there until October 18th. And so we actually have Mercury in Libra for 6 weeks. And so this is great, because Mercury is our communication. Mercury and this communication now is going into this place where we're weighing the scales. And depending on what somebody's personal rising sign, it will show up in a different area of your life. But the overall theme, when Mercury retrograde begins, we have a trine with Black Moon Lilith, trine, Saturn, trine, Mars. Let me break that down for you quickly. Okay. So, because that's a bunch of astrology speak. So Black Moon Lilith are the things that you have repressed, the things that have gone left unsaid, the way you felt exiled from your community. If you look at the mythology of Black Moon Lilith, now I'm not a I'm not a theologist, but in the mythology of Black Moon Lilith, in the story of Adam and Eve, before there was Eve, there was Lilith, who was supposed to basically be submissive toward Adam, and she didn't want to be submissive toward Adam. She was like, no, I want to have equal say in this. And Adam banished her from the Garden of Eden, and when this happened, all of her children would be taken from her in the mythology. And so Black Moon Lilith is this feminine archetype that was exiled and shamed and told she was wrong and that she couldn't be in her full power, sitting in the sidelines of another story that's, and then the rest of the story goes with along comes Eve. So we have this archetype of this feminine, this repressed feminine sitting trine, which is a favorable energy. So it's like this repressed, exiled part of ourselves is getting a seat at the table. It's in favorable energy with Saturn, which is our integrity, which is our karma, which is all about timing, the timing of our life. And then also trine. So with Mars, the part of us that wants to come fight
and take action.
Exactly. And so at the beginning of Mercury retrograde, those are all happening in air signs. So Black Moon is in Gemini. She's going to want to talk. Saturn is in Aquarius. He's going to want to make it work with humanity and the way the social structures are working. And Mars is in Libra, and it's going to be about fighting for justice.
Wow.
And so I think that's a very interesting piece to recognize that this is going to be playing in the astrology. We're going to have these energies that we're working with from the end of September to the middle of October. And at the same time that is happening, we also have Venus, who I started talking about her being in Scorpio. So Venus is in Scorpio, which is like femme fatale. It's like this, it's like Venus in Scorpio is this kind of, don't mind if I swear a little bit, like a badass woman. I think of like Angelina Jolie in the movies, how she's just, so got this character that is a little bit deceptive and going to do whatever it takes to get what she needs and also fight for justice, right? Like there's this.
But that's interesting because my natal Venus is in Scorpio.
So is mine.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe that says a lot about us then.
Yeah, I think it does. Actually, all of the closest women in my life are Venus and Scorpio. And
really?
Yes, all of them. There's one or two women that have been closer to me in my life, but they ended up being friends that didn't stick around for a long time. You know what I mean? Like not that anything went sour, but right. My closest friends that have been around for decades, all Venus and Scorpio.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad I'm right in there then.
Yeah. It's a strong Venus placement. Some people say it's a hard Venus placement. I think it's quite a powerful, because this Venus placement in Scorpio is going to look at the shadow. And we need that more than anything in the world right now. We need to look at the shadow of what we're creating, the trajectory that we're on, these things that have been repressed, the discipline and the integrity and how we're taking action through all of this. And again, it doesn't matter what side of the story you're on with the global, where we are in the world. It doesn't matter where you are. Everybody has, I'm sure, a way to relate to this story that's playing out in the stars. Anyway, I just think it's going to get interesting.
It does sound like a really interesting path. Is it called the Grand Trine, right? When it's all.
Yeah. And this is a grand air trine. So it's going to be, people are going to be talking. It's social. It's about humanity. It's a good one. And then we also have the Libra new moon on October 6th. So while Mercury's retrograde, the new moon on October 6th in Libra is an exact conjunction with Mars. And so we're getting all this Mars, Scorpio is ruled by Mars and Pluto. We've got Mars active in that grand trine. On the new moon, we have Mars coming in again. When I was looking at, like, I won't go into the day-to-day aspects because it will be here for 100 years. But Mars has a lot of really favorable energy. Like Mars is getting a good run during this Libra season.
Okay.
And so that's why I think it's going to get interesting. I think that for people that have the capacity to keep their finger on the pulse of what's going on with the pandemic, and I actually completely understand that sometimes we just need to rest and turn it all off, and just take a break, like just, it's too much. But I think if for those that do have the capacity to keep their finger on the pulse of what's going on, we are going to see some really interesting shifts and changes over Libra and Scorpio season, but we can talk about that in the Scorpio one.
Well, everything I've heard about what's coming up in the fall astrologically, and I've been hearing about this since the spring, is that it's a really fascinating and interesting and kind of provocative time in the sense that we can make some giant leaps forward, probably because we're talking.
Yeah, and maybe more voices will be heard, and who knows? And Libra is justice. So if I were to pan out on the astrology just for a moment, when I look at like the bigger cycles, what we're seeing in the bigger cycles, and I'm talking like 5-6 year bigger picture, something that's not unfolding in a weekend or in a season, right? But we're at this point where the old, and this was so much easier to talk about before we were here, by the way. I just want to preface what I'm about to say. 5 years ago, it was a lot easier to say the words that are about to come out of my mouth.
Okay.
This might be controversial. This might make people feel a little bit uneasy, but I think it's important to keep this big picture in our hearts, is that the astrology has been guiding us towards this place where system and structure is going to fail us. It is going to crumble and disintegrate and be rebuilt. And in the process of that, it very clearly says in the astrology that the old power systems, the old leaders are going to do everything they can in an attempt to maintain their control and their power. But the people are the ones who truly hold the power at this time. And so it's the actions of the people living in their heart, living by integrity, doing what they know is right, and actually overriding the power centers. Okay. So I know everything I just said is super controversial,
but it's been so obvious,
right?
It's been so obvious. And, oftentimes we look at this and we look at the surface of what's happening, and, we're going to overthrow these things with violence and with this and with that. But when you look at some of the behind the scenes things of the new cryptocurrencies coming up, the new ways that people are finding work through online organizations, the different ways people are organizing with one another, not this loud, us versus them surface stuff, but kind of like people just changing their minds and saying, well, I'm going to start something and shape my company this way. And then people join and they move forward. And it's like this quiet underground complete shift that we don't see on the surface because it's taken up by all the conflict. But when you look beneath the surface, everything is already deeply in change. It just hasn't risen to that place where it's displaced, the surface level drama yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that to me is actually really helpful information, because it says I can unsubscribe from these systems of control.
Yeah, because they're not going to be around for very long.
Exactly. And so when decisions are being made, I'm up in Canada, although I lived in California for 7 years. I'm looking more at Canadian politics, and I'm really appalled at the leader of Canada right now. I think he is using such divisive language, and it's scary, I think, what he's doing. And we're coming into an election right before the Libra season begins. Okay. And I get a little bit upset. And then I just look at the astrology and I'm like, no, it's okay, because this is temporary. This is temporary. This too is a cycle that will come to an end.
And we humans never make change. Well, at least as groups, we don't make change until we're required to make change. Like we just go kicking and screaming. We're not very good at saying, wow, here's a better idea. Let's all just move toward this better idea. It's often, a fight to give up the old and to take on the new. And that's a human nature thing. And I think if we can individually and then maybe more collectively begin to be a little bit more Libra and weighing, this is the new, this is the old, this new has a lot to going for it. And so maybe we can bring what's good of the old and, accelerate the new and be a little bit more dispassionate individually and collectively. Maybe we wouldn't have to go through so much drama on the surface.
Yeah, exactly. And what I've noticed too is that the government, I'm in British Columbia, the government is like, oh, everybody has to do these vaccination passports and it's going to create all this divide. And then I walk into town and nobody's doing it. Everybody's like, okay, yeah, good idea, guys. But nobody's actually doing it. And so we have this other thing where the government is really needing the humans to comply to enforce a system that many people don't want. But like the reality is if we don't download the app, it doesn't actually get to go into place. Right. And so that's an example of like the people versus the power. And I think it's really interesting. I'm in a smaller area and it's actually become a topic that is reconnecting people where the vaxxed and the unvaxxed are like, well, yeah, but we all of us don't agree with this pass. And that to me is amazing because like, well, what else are they going to, track us on? And I live in a community that is full of American draft dodgers. That's how it was established. And so they're all kind of anti-government already. So they're just like, oh, wait a minute. No, we're not doing that. That doesn't make sense to us. And so I think it's going to be a really interesting how it all plays out. Of course, there's people that are like, no, we have to do it and whatever.
Oh, but there always will be. It'll be interesting. Yeah.
I think it'll be really interesting. Yeah. So then let's just wrap up the season because then we have the Aries full moon on the 20th of October. And that's the very end of Libra season. And I don't know if you remember how I said that Mars was conjunct the new moon. Now Mars is opposite the full moon. And the moon is ruled by Mars. And the moon is conjunct Eris, which is an asteroid that lives way, way, way out in the, like past Pluto. It's quite far out. And Eris is square Pluto. And this, again, another really interesting thing. A lot of astrologers are attributing all the protests to this Eris Pluto square, and it's exact for this entire time. One of the most beautiful things that's been happening in Canada are these silent protests where people just go and they stand 6 feet apart in silence. It started with the emergency services, like the police officers and the firefighters and the EMTs, like the ambulance crews, and they're standing in silence with a stoic look on their face with their hands crossed in front of their torso and not saying anything, but just making their presence known. Like, we are not going to stand for this. And I think it is so beautiful to see peaceful protest. Just like, hey, we're like, we want to keep our country. We're not interested in losing our country over fear. And here we are, the people at the front line that, are the social services of the country saying, we're not playing your game.
Very Canadian too, to have a nice a nice silent protest, because ours are pretty noisy down here in the lower 48.
Oh, yeah. Well, who knows? I just think it's really interesting. Canada I've been looking at the US and the Canada natal charts, because every country has a chart, every person, every business has a chart. And Canada has something that is so unique. It has the Sun-Uranus conjunction in their chart, which means they're going to do things differently. Canada is always going to do it a little bit differently. And when I saw that, these silent protests had just been brought to my attention. And I just thought, isn't that so, like you said, isn't that so Canadian of us? We can continue and go a bit deeper into Scorpio season, but I think what we're going to see is some really interesting action. And I think the main theme for people is to unplug from fear and plug into your hearts. And let's get outside of any system of control or influence that is driving you towards fear, and move towards the newer blossoming systems and communities that want to return more love, more connection, more reason, more heart to it. Because we humanity has a choice right now. And it's up to each of us as individuals how we're going to show up in that choice.
Yes.
Do you want to march us towards a civil war, or do you want to march us towards really a super empowered place of heart-centered living?
Amen. Well, and if people need any last little incentive to let go of the fear and come into love, is it's been demonstrated again and again and again that when you are in fear, you do not make good decisions. Everything contracts and you make very reactive decisions, where when you are in that state of love, like you were saying before, you can pan out, you can see a bigger picture, you can make a better choice based on a different set of factors than you make when you're in fear. And I think that's one reason why fear is such a popular political tactic right now, because if you control somebody's fear movements, like if you can juice their fear, you can basically control their actions. But you can't control the actions of love, because they are all over the board, depending on how people are responding to their own inner calling. But emotional reactions and fear reactions are very predictable. And I think that's why they're such a tactic right now.
Absolutely. One of the most interesting videos I watched recently, it's called Mass Psychosis, How an Entire Population Becomes Mentally Ill. It has 3.5 million views.
Wow.
It is just an incredible lesson on how the mind works and how we are able to be controlled by fear. I think it should be required viewing for all humans right now.
All right. Well, I will include the link to that, I think, if you can.
I can send it to you.
Okay. And I'll put the link of that in the show notes so that people can have easy access to that, because that does sound like, required listening and viewing for everybody at this point. So thank you for that. And I'm looking forward to our Scorpio, because of course I'm a Scorpio. So I'm always excited about Scorpio things. So looking forward to our next conversation. Is there any last little bit of thing you want to say about Libra before we sign off?
I think we covered a lot of ground. I think that just really sitting into your back body and weighing out the sides and be willing to listen is a really important feature of this time in our lives.
Okay, excellent. All right. Yeah. And you can find Jana's contact information and website and discount on her pass for her website and things on conversationsfromtheedge.net or in the show notes wherever you're listening to this. So thank you, Jana. It's always just so fun talking to you and hearing the deep insight that you have as we move forward through all of these amazing astrological energies.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's so wonderful to chat with you as always.
This is your host, Kristine Madera. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation from the edge of consciousness. You can find all our conversations at conversationsfromtheedge.net. You'll also find links to schedule a private conversation with me or any of my friends, as well as tools to help you expand your own consciousness and explore what's possible for you outside the boundaries of your current perceptions. Feel free to use this podcast to start your own conversation by sharing it with friends, on social media, in your blog, or even in your own podcast. And as always, live the adventure of pushing your own edge. It's the most amazing adventure there is.